afternoon, and it's incredible to see so many of you here. Kat just walked in and wasn't expecting many people, so we're both feeling very energised.
I thought you'd all go home and you've used up so much energy over the last 2 days. I thought you'd be exhausted and want to get the train home, so it's lovely to see you all.
Quick introduction, my name's Sapna Agrawal. I'm the Director for Modernisation and Reform. I'm in the Cabinet Office and I help coordinate the cross-government efforts around improving how we work. And it's a real privilege to get to sit here today and get to chat to Kat, who is just about to take over from Alex Chisholm as the Chief Operating Officer of the Civil Service and Permanent Secretary of the Cabinet Office. But you're in your handover period, you've still got your other job going. So I was wondering, before we get into the meat of this, if you could tell us a bit about your current job and what attracted you to taking on.
Yeah, why is it called? It's like my panel interview all over again. So I am currently at His Majesty's Treasury, which is the Finance and Economics Ministry here in the UK. And my job is to run public spending. And I also oversee international finance and national security, so that includes things like financial sanctions for Russia. So what does that really mean? Well, one, it's my job to make sure that the country lives within its budget, as is set by Parliament, and that's a really wicked task when you spend £1.3 trillion a year. It's quite a lot of money. And the other thing I do is I help to use public spending in order to drive investment in growth, in capital infrastructure, in research and development, in innovation, in people. So I have the awesome job and privilege of saying, right, if we're going to spend £1.3 trillion a year, what do we really want to achieve in terms of strategic outcomes? How can we deliver for the long-term good of the United Kingdom and the British taxpayer? And what outcomes are most important and how do we use money to get there? So I have a very exciting job, and I work in partnership in my current job with Alex Chisholm, and it is, having seen him operate, it is such a humbling thing to be taking over his role. So he's literally a giant in every single way. So it's exciting times, but I'm desperately trying not to do that classic thing of doing two jobs at the same time and failing miserably.
Well, Kat, you're having a big impact already, even just moonlighting in the role. So just before we get into your new priorities, one of the recurring themes over the last 2 days is the role of financing in innovation and the role of of finance ministries, and in terms of risk-taking, how we could take a more portfolio approach to investment and a longer-term approach to investment. And with your Treasury hat on, and maybe your MOD hat, it'd be brilliant to hear what you view as a productive relationship. How can we better sort of make finance feel like an enabler to the innovation that we want?
Yeah, so I might give you two sort of examples. So in Treasury, our job is to balance economic growth, borrowing, and obviously we have a lot of borrowing at the moment. We've got a high level of debt and a high level of spending. And you've got to balance the trade-offs amongst those things. So often people say to me, can't you just print more money or go and borrow some more money? And the simple answer is, it's not quite that straightforward. So that's why I spend so much time thinking about how do we get the maximum innovation return for investment. And in a weird way, my job is the ultimate portfolio of running the portfolio of investment for the country. And we'll spend about £600 billion over this Parliament. It's about 120 billion quid. We'll spend 24 billion on research and development alone. So when people say just spend more money, I'm like, it's a bit lazy. We're spending a lot of money. Let's think about how we make it work harder for us. Another example I'd give you is in a previous life. So before I was in the Treasury, I worked at the Ministry of Defence. And there I was responsible for procurement and money. And one of the portfolios that we had there was an innovation portfolio, which was entirely about how do we maximise the military capability and deterrent effect that we have through research and development and very, very early technology. So at the time, we were looking at hypersonics, direct energy weapons, so lasers and the role of lasers in future warfare. And you have to get very, very comfortable with spending quite a lot of your money on things that you have no idea whether they're actually going to work. And I love talking to scientists and going, tell me how you know whether your investment is actually going to work, and what metrics, what sort of evaluation are you going to do? I never get a straight answer. But that is a really good example of, you need senior people to say, do you know what, I'm willing to take a calculated risk. 2, I'm willing to think about long-term investment. 3, I'm willing to stop things when the evaluation tells us, do you know what, this bet just isn't working, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and think differently about something. And 4, to support people when, we don't quite get things right. And that's very easy for me to say, but in practice, that needs great leadership on the ground. It needs the tone set by both the centre of government and senior leaders. And you've got to have the processes and the local management to kind of make it work. But we do it. We do it in lots of different ways, and especially in science, innovation, technology. And I think we should be a bit bold about saying, do you know what, we're really good at this, actually. And there's some really good examples both around the world and here in the UK. It's not always bad, and we don't always get it wrong.
You mentioned leadership there, and one of the recurring themes across the sessions has been that we need to have leaders that are willing to, empower their teams, create psychological safety for them to innovate, and give people permission. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit about your thoughts on that, or any experiences that you've had.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, just talking about the MOD and moving to the Treasury. So the MOD is like 250,000 people, very, very hierarchical. You probably know that. And tends to be quite led by a very senior group of people. And then I moved to the Treasury, which is a very small place that is really big on empowering the most junior person to take the biggest decisions. And there's no right or wrong. There are very, very good reasons for why those organisations work in that way. But I suppose my early compare and contrast when I joined the Treasury were, one, isn't it so exciting that we give the most difficult thing to the most junior person with the least experience? There are some pitfalls to that. But isn't that great to be able to say, do you know what, as a leader, I trust you to take this really wicked problem, and I'm going to give you empowerment and authority to work out what you think the solution is. Like, that is a really, really bold, high-risk thing to do. I think, secondly, we always underestimate our own agency. Like, the number of people who come to me in my current job and say, could you help me out with this thing? Because I need this approval over here. Or I don't think the Treasury is going to let me do something, because you always say no. So how can you help me to kind of work out how to get you guys to say yes? And it's like, no, you can just do it. You don't need to come to us for permission. And so our kind of default can be, one, to assume we don't have the authority to do something and that someone else has. So I would always suggest, just question that a little bit. Assume you've got more power than you think you do. And then, secondly, take some risk and go and find some different people with different ideas and empower the most junior person you know to go and think about it. Because I bet you they will take that very seriously and think very hard about it and come up with some brilliant options that the most senior people, who tend to be less creative, and I include myself in that, go and get them to use their creative thinking.
Brilliant. There was a panel yesterday where we had some brilliant civil servants who were really keen to innovate. I need to sort of track them down. I'd love to pinch them for my team. And they were talking about feeling like their managers were holding them back from doing that or saying no. Potentially from your MOD experience, could you tell us any of the tips and tricks that you've had to influence your manager or people around you to get on board with your ideas?
Yeah, well, sometimes you always need a sponsor or an advocate. You need a champion, and that goes for so many things in life, not just innovation. Just generally, if you want to get on, you need to know who your champions and cheerleaders are. And I think if you've got a great idea, try and work out, it's not always in your direct line management. Like, so much of what we do in government is team focused, it's system focused. So who are your partners, who are your collaborators, and who are your champions and cheerleaders? And then help them to kind of advocate with your line manager. And, there's a good reason why line managers can be a bit risk adverse sometimes, because it's their accountability. And, people, the more senior you get, the more responsibility you've got, the more you worry about the repercussions, and it's all quite scary. So, be generous with kind of understanding why that's the case, but go and find the people who are going to be your partners in crime.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think of how can you use this as an opportunity to make your line manager look great. They're going to be more willing to get on more.
This is great news for me, isn't it? Like, Sapna's just going to make me look fantastic.
So Kat's my line manager. Brilliant. So you mentioned agency, and Alex Chisholm in his opening remarks yesterday was talking about stewardship, and that it's really our responsibility as civil servants to kind of push things forward and innovate. I'd love to hear your kind of views on that.
Yeah, and Alex is the ultimate person who has tenacity and drive and stewardship to see things through. And look, we should all respect the fact that the more senior you are, the easier it is sometimes to say that. But look, stewardship is such an important thing, and especially in the civil service. I think I get really gushy the longer I'm in the civil service, because we have this really precious constitutional role to ensure that the state is well run over the long term. And that is a really, really important part of our responsibility in the UK civil service. And it's something to hold very dear and to think every day about our stewardship of this wonderful organisation. But to be a great steward, if I think about Alex, what has made him so brilliant at it is because, one, he's been very, very clear about the long-term outcome he's trying to achieve. Two, he's very good at sort of setting out what's the system I'm operating in and how do I pull all of the levers to ensure that I'm doing everything I can with colleagues to pull the levers that they've got. And then thirdly, there's just a bit about kind of humility and tenacity, which are really important behaviours just generally in the civil service, but a humility to know that you don't always get it right, and the tenacity to be relentlessly positive about being able to achieve things if you stay focused and you keep going. And I think, they're qualities that I particularly admire in Alex, but I think, they're the sorts of behaviours I think we all need to demonstrate.
Thank you. So I appreciate you're not quite in the job, you're in your handover period. But as this is our first opportunity to hear from you, it'd be really interesting to hear kind of what are the kind of challenges about that you're excited to get your teeth into, and especially in terms of the centre's role in driving innovation across government. What would you like to sort of get cracking on? Not expecting you to have the answer, but even outlining the challenges would be great.
Yeah, so very early days, so going to caveat everything I say. I'm probably going to prove myself wrong when I come back next year and say I was completely wrong. But I suppose context is everything, so it's a really exciting year, 2024. We've got 2 billion people around the globe going to the ballot box. In the UK, we've got some really interesting opportunities with the economy, inflation coming down in the right direction finally. We've got some really big things to think about post-pandemic, war in Ukraine. The UK state and the civil service especially has been through a lot of change, quite a lot of fatigue. We've had to do some really, really innovative but hard things. So I think there's an opportunity to just reset a bit and take stock and take advantage of the fact we're in this quite exciting period. The thing that I'm particularly interested in, though, is in particular to innovation, is sort of how do we focus on the things that only the centre of government can do? So only the centre of government can create the conditions for the state to succeed. And that doesn't mean us running things and controlling things from the centre and setting lots of rules. It's actually about how do we liberate and empower Whitehall, departments, the country, devolved governments, enterprise across our supply chains to really, really grapple with some of the challenges that we're facing. And so how do we do that? Well, I think the centre therefore needs to focus on only the things that the centre can do. And the things that the centre really have to do is to set the strategy, to be clear about the priority outcomes and the problems we're most trying to fix. And that has to be part of the usual democratic process with ministers. And then thirdly, we need to set the investment. So this is my old job now, but a very exciting thing is we will have a spending review. We will have some sort of comprehensive spending review at some point. So that is where strategy and resources come together to bring fiscal meaning to grand ambition. So only the centre can do that. But I'm really interested in sort of how do we create the conditions for people to succeed and to liberate people to innovate more effectively.
Brilliant. Another theme that has come up a couple of times is that there's pockets of brilliant innovation happening across government, across businesses, but one, in government, are we good at scaling? And two, tech adoption and diffusion across the economy is probably not as strong in the UK as it could be, given how strong we are at R&D. I was just wondering if you had any reflections with your Treasury hat or your new Cabinet Office hat on what we can do to help fix that.
So I think that's the million-dollar question, is how do you take, I don't know, a great idea about how to be more productive with theatre output in an NHS acute trust in Norfolk and share that idea and scale it in a way that's appropriate to the business environment of another organisation. I think it's really hard. And I'm a great believer that you shouldn't try and oversimplify difficult things. We should sort of have the mindset of this is quite complicated. But I think there are certain things that help. So one is systems leadership. A lot of our effort between the Cabinet Office and the Treasury has been in how do we work with leaders across the whole of the state and the private sector to join up dots, to share best practice, to learn from each other. And that's why this sort of conference is so important. So just having vehicles where people are networked and you can use technology to share ideas and talk about best practice and failures in an open, safe way is really, really important. And then secondly, something that, if I give an example of something that we've done in the Treasury, so we've got something called the Shared Outcomes Fund, which is all about providing seed funding for cross-cutting great ideas. And so it's like all incubation. How do you take a great idea and back it? How do we take innovation from research and development, whether that's in an academic setting or within government itself, and spin it out in a way that's scalable and commercially investable? Actually, we're pretty good at that. I think, some of our recent successes, like, the vaccine during COVID, we're really good at it as a country. So we're constantly saying, how can we do it better? But, 9 times out of 10, we do manage. But those connections, being able to access funding, being able to learn, they're the things that I think we've got to be able to work harder at.
You mentioned systems leadership there. We've got lots of people in the audience from all types of organisations, including lots of our private sector partners. Do you have any advice to our partners or to the civil servants in the room about how we could collaborate better?
Yeah, well, systems leadership is hard to do in practice, but I think it's all about mindset. So, our job as senior leaders in the state, our job is to lead across boundaries. And when you think about it, we put lots of boundaries and barriers in place artificially. So if I give it, in the civil service, it's like, which department do you belong to? Which business group within that department do you belong to? Which region do you work in? Which office are you associated with? We've got all of these identities. And actually, when you think about the big challenges that we've got, and if you take something like homelessness, you don't define your solutions by the boundary within which you operate. So the greatest thing that we've got to do is to think about systems, break down those barriers, think about how we can transcend that. And it's a mindset as much as it is a process thing. Everything we do is with the private sector. It is a really important partnership. We operate and run a state that is entirely delivered across the private and the public sector. I think we artificially put boundaries between the private and the public sector. I spent half of my career in the private and half in the public sector, and it seems to me we're all trying to solve the same problems, and we're all trying to make the country a better place and to work in a global economy. So, I think we artificially put that boundary in place, and the people who are able to connect across the private and the public sector and the third sector are really special people, but we can all do it, We all have the agency to do that, and we just have to give ourselves permission.
You mentioned in one of your answers sort of embracing failure, and one of the things that we've been talking about across the 2 days is that sort of giving people permission to fail, celebrating failure and learning from it. Not to put you on the spot, but I'm actually just going to do that.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about a time where you failed and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, and failure is a really interesting word in itself, isn't it? So, when you ask that question, you sort of go, oh, I haven't really failed as such, but I've definitely not succeeded in the things that I really wanted to achieve. Maybe that is failure. I don't know. I won't do that classic civil service thing at trying to define failure in front of you, but there's definitely something about, when you set yourself a task or an ambition or something that you want to change or do differently. I don't think I've ever succeeded first time round. And actually, there's some really big, complicated things that I think we continually fail at. And if you don't mind me saying, not to put you on the spot, if you think about civil service modernisation and reform, we're constantly talking about how do we slow down churn, how do we become more skilled, how do we solve our retention issues and compete with the private sector. Now, we still haven't cracked it. I think we are working very hard at it, but we are trying lots and lots of things to solve those heady problems, but we haven't cracked it, and we have to keep going back to the drawing board, and we have to be humble and explain to people what we've tried and why it hasn't worked and what we've learnt from it. So I hate to say it, but maybe not failure, but I generally think it's a good thing. If you crack it first time, God, you are superhuman. So it's more, the thing I find more interesting is how do you talk about it and how do you learn and how do we explain to people what we've tried and how we've evaluated things? That's a really healthy discussion to have with people openly.
Now you're in your new role, I've got some fascinating books to lend you. There's one that's called The History of the British Civil Service, and it's sort of 150 years of what's worked and what's not. And it's really humbling when you realise for 150 years we've been taking on the same challenges. But I'm sure for all of us, whatever business you're in, people, technology, engaging with your customers, all of these things have always been important and are for all of our businesses, but take a different format because the context keeps changing. But it's pretty humbling. Brilliant, thank you. And could you tell us about a time where you really felt like you had the backing of your manager or your minister to go and do something bold that was against the norm?
Yes, and this isn't a great example in some ways because it was in a crisis mode. But even so, I think there's lots of interesting lessons to learn. So, COVID was a really fascinating period for doing bold, high-risk, innovative things. And I think it's always helpful to kind of think about what were the conditions then, what made it different other than the fact we were in a major pandemic and, this was life and death. What are the things that we were able to do differently that actually could work and be very sensible in a normal, steady state life? So I think about some of the things we did on COVID, Nightingale hospitals, vaccine development, furlough. God, I never thought we would be running a furlough scheme and paying for people's salaries when I joined the Treasury. They were really high risk, innovative, interesting things. So there's a bit about, was it the mindset? Was it the political backing? Was it the expediency and the life and death situation? And why is it that you can do those things in a kind of crisis situation, but not necessarily in business as usual? I don't actually know the answer. But we've done lots of studies into how we did governance and spending, and obviously we're going through a really important lessons learnt process at the moment as a state, and we have done lots of things differently as a result of it. But I don't know. I think that's a really important question for us to get some more answers to.
Yeah. I often think it's the sort of the clarity of objective. Everybody was working to the same goal, and that sort of helped cut through the noise. And I wonder how you create that sort of clarity in peacetime.
Yeah, that collective mission.
Yeah.
The fact that the whole of the state was focused on one mission. Now that is obviously doesn't often happen, but it does say something about if you have a smaller number of strategic outcomes and kind of common collective things that you're trying to achieve together, does it mean you will be more innovative, be able to take more risk and deliver better outcomes? I suspect the answer is probably yes.
Yeah.
But it's always at what cost? What is it that you're not doing and you can't afford it? And, and again, if we look back at COVID, we think about education and what's happened to the economy, at what cost?
You mentioned sort of long-term thinking. So for the civil servants in the room, and then for partners that we work with, you said this year's going to be a year of change. Also, the world is changing very rapidly around us. We don't, where we are on generative AI and AI this year versus the conference last year, many people have mentioned we're in a really different spot. Things are happening very quickly. We don't know what the world will look like in 10 years. So how do we collectively think about the long term and then think about innovation in the long term?
Yeah, it's a great question because you're always trying to predict what you think the strategic trends and the strategic issues are. And there are loads of really wonderful bodies who have a go at forecasting big global strategic trends, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. I mean, forecasts normally are wrong. So I think there's something about how do we use all of that intelligence to say, well, if we know that we're going to have an ageing population that's likely to live longer, but with a longer period of chronic illness, and we're going to have a smaller cohort of younger people in the future with greater levels of mental health challenges, well, how do we take that insight? Because we know that that's going to happen. We're pretty sure that's going to happen. That's the great thing about demographics. You sort of know that people are generally going to grow up. You know that that is going to be the case in 2050, 2060. So what policy thinking do we need to be preparing for now? What ideas and innovation would help us to manage the consequences of those demographic challenges in the future? That's just one example, but there are certain things that we can predict more accurately than others. And I think it's our job in the Cabinet Office in particular to be able to say, well, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, this is what we think might happen. So let's take some of those challenges and work out what the strategic interventions for the long term might be. And then only government really can kind of think about what are the policy conditions, what are the economic policy choices, what are the social policy choices that we have to think about in order to try and get ahead of it.
Brilliant. And we've been talking a lot about sort of skilling and supporting leaders. I appreciate you're starting a new job, and that's probably a learning curve in itself. But is there a certain skill that you're trying to develop this year? Is there a knowledge area that you're trying to get deeper on? What are you going to focus on in terms of your L&D?
Gosh, knowledge. So I'm a historian, so your 150 years of the civil service I will love. But actually, because I'm constantly looking backwards, I think the challenge for me is actually what I've just described, which is how do we be more predictive, and what skills do I need to be able to think in a more predictive, forward-looking way. And I think the other thing is, I mean, I class myself as a bit of an amateur tech person. Like, I've done a lot of digital change. But your point about the pace at which this is moving and the experimentation, like, it's so hard to keep up with. So a bit of a personal challenge for me is how do I go about relying on the brilliant experts that I work with, and both in the private and the public sector, to help me with that. But what do I need to sort of personally do to make that an effective thing? And then my third very personal thing is I really need to learn to be more patient because I have this kind of constant sense of, because of the pace of change, because of the importance of the issues that we are dealing with, I sort of have this, I put a lot of pressure on myself to sort of go, come on, let's fix it. And actually sort of getting that balance of well thought through strategic solutioneering and taking that time up front to kind of get it right and to work out what you really, really think, and then having a faster delivery and implementation because you got the planning and the thought right. And for me, I'm just kind of constantly slowing down so that I can speed up. That's my mantra to myself at the moment.
Brilliant. Well, it's really interesting that you've mentioned that. So to go back to the start yesterday, in Alex's keynote, he described this decade as a restless decade, and that that might sort of spill over for a while. So maybe you don't need to be more patient. Maybe that you're just embodying what we're all living. But brilliant. Thank you so much, Kat. It's been such an honour to get to ask you all these questions, and for all of us to get to know you a bit better. Really excited to see what you'll be saying a year on of what we've achieved in the Cabinet Office and cross-government on innovation. And I'm now going to hand over to Siobhan, who's going to close us out.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to Sapna and to Kat. I'm sure you'll join me in giving them a very warm round of applause. And if you don't mind, just a couple of minutes, but a special thanks to Kat. I know it's a hugely busy time for you transitioning from one role to another, so thank you for making time in your schedule to come and talk to us all here today. And just to close off, a couple of other thank yous from me. And Kat, you mentioned there the importance of partnerships and how we're always working across sectors. So I would like to thank all of our fantastic knowledge partners who have been so supportive of Innovation 2024 over the last couple of days, and in particular to EY, our Platinum Global Knowledge Partner. I would also like to thank everybody across government, so individuals and organisations that worked with Global Government Forum to make this event such a huge success. I would like to thank our fantastic speakers. I'm sure you'll agree with me. We had such brilliant speakers over the last 2 days, both from here in the UK, but also a special thanks as well to all of our speakers who flew in from across the globe to share their insights with us over the last 2 days. And then last but by no means least, to you, our fantastic audience, because whether you've been with us for 1 day or for 2, your energy has just been brilliant over the 2 days of Innovation 2024. And one of the big themes that came out in terms of innovation, how we know we can have kind of innovative colleagues, is that desire to learn. And we've had so many questions throughout every single session that you've all shown here just how much you really do want to learn from each other, and that engagement has been fantastic. I said at the beginning yesterday that I hope you would learn a lot over these 2 days, but I also hoped you would have fun. So I do hope that you've had fun, to the extent that if you have enjoyed it this year, please put in your diaries the 25th and the 26th of March next year, back here in Excel, will be Innovation 2025, so you can note that now. And we will also be sending everybody who attended and registered a questionnaire. If you don't mind filling that in, we'd be hugely grateful, just to make sure that we can put on the agenda that is of most interest and most use to all of you. This year has certainly been the year of AI, I think that's safe to say, but that might not be the case next year. Who knows what the focus will be next year? And then the very last thing, one thing that really struck me yesterday, I know we've been pushing everybody, how can we be more innovative? How can we meet these challenges that we've been talking about? But a lady yesterday, I don't know if she's still in the room, she said, we're really hard on ourselves. We're actually really good at what we do. So I'd just like to say a big note from me, thank you for everything you do. I mean, the work that you do is already making a difference to people's lives. So I hope you go away incredibly proud of the work you do across the public service and with our partners. But I also hope you go away after these 2 days being able to innovate even further so that we can make even more of a difference to people's lives. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again. And I hope we see you back here next year. Thanks, everyone.